Okay, I think we're live. There we go. Hello, everyone. So, slightly different tonight. We are going live into the Facebook group, Your Best Midlife, as well as going live on my YouTube channel, Bev Thorogood ADHD. You can see it written up there somewhere. And I'm joined again by the wonderful Niki Woods to talk menopause. And tonight, I think we're probably going to focus on nutrition. If anybody has got questions, I do have the chat open. Let me just show chat.
And I just checked on Facebook and it has worked. We are live.
We are live, have we? Are we? Right, let me just scroll a little bit and see if I can see it. So I can, yeah, there we are. And hopefully I can see the comments as well when they come through. So if you have got questions, do ask. I know this is a bad time of day. Normally we don't get an awful lot of people watching live. Often they look at this later on. We are streaming, as I say, to YouTube as well. So this is a first for me-ish, because last week we accidentally went live on YouTube, which wasn't planned. So welcome everybody. So let's talk about food, nutrition, menopause. I don't know if we can hear you, Niki. I'm not sure if your microphone's working. Can you just say hello?
Hello.
You are
working,
yeah.
All right.
Yeah, you're not. You've got a slight delay, I think. So you wrote a couple of LinkedIn posts this week, both relating to stuff in the tabloids. One in the Daily Fail, one in the Sun. Both of which I have to say are not my favourite publications. However, I was really surprised actually that the one in the Sun
was the one in the Mail that wasn't crap.
The Mail, I beg your pardon. The one in the Mail was actually a really good article. So tell us a little bit about each of them and what got you on a rant this week, because I know quite rightly, and I agree with your rant, by the way. Tell us, first of all, let's start with the Sun. What was that article and why did it get you back up?
So that article was actually picked up by loads of local newspapers as well, because it popped up in my local paper as well. And they never say they're syndicated from others. They just present them as their own journalism now, which is another issue. Basically, the headline was, these are the three foods, the three fruits you should never eat if you want to lose weight. And this sort of headline drives me potty. And I get, I see this sort of thing all the time, and it's half the problem for people with their nutrition confusion. So this was based on something that my least favorite nutrition person, Michael Mosley, had said, which was that pineapples, mango and some other fruit that I've completely forgotten were terrible. You should never, ever eat them.
That's because of the high sugar content.
Because of the high sugar content. And so I reposted this basically saying that I was fuming on behalf of pineapple, mango, etc. No, because this is not the problem. And people are not overweight because they eat melon and pineapple and whatever it was, grapes or something. But people are overweight because of nutrition confusion. And the nutrition confusion, because of bobbins in the media like that, drives people to be so confused that they can either get hoodwinked by con diets, etc., that they end up having loads of stupid supplements they think they've got to take, or they get so overwhelmed that they just end up not trying to do anything correct with their nutrition and just end up eating loads of highly processed crap instead, because in their head, sugar is bad and fruit is sugar.
What amazed me was there was nothing in that article that said, if you want to lose weight, here are three foods that you should stop eating. Highly processed, ultra processed foods with a massive list of ingredients that you've never heard of. And for me, 3 fruits that are packed full of phytonutrients, that are packed full of fiber, that have, you know, enzymes in them that are probably really good for the gut, are being demonized. And yet we're not, in the same article, demonizing artificial foods, foods that do not look like anything that came off a tree or came out of the ground or came out of an animal, not out of. We wouldn't want to eat what comes out of an animal, but what comes off an animal. And it got my goat up as well. And I think for me, the thing that stood out for both articles, and we'll talk about the other one in a moment, they referred to both Dr. Michael Mosley, and I don't doubt he's a doctor, but I do question his credentials about being a dietitian or a nutritionalist. They both got referred to as gurus. And I think this is the big problem. And I love the fact that in your LinkedIn post, you said, what we should be cutting out are gurus. Forget cutting out pineapple. Let's get rid of the gurus, because they're feeding us really confusing information that is just leading to this overwhelm. And we're talking really about menopause and the impact in menopause. Talk me through a little bit more about why I mean, you said your least favorite person. What is it about this man that gets you back up?
Well, you correctly said that he knows bugger all about nutrition, and basically he's not a nutritionist, he's not a dietitian, and 95% of nutritionists and dietitians really disagree with most of what he says. Yeah, there are some things in there that he says that are correct, like if he actually mentions, for example, fiber, you know, he does, but most of what he said is guruistic and it doesn't help anyone. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I have a real issue with is that he really pushes these starvation diets as well, like the fast 800 and all of these things, which as a blanket thing to do are really problematic. There is some research about very highly obese people going on these starvation type diets and it working quite well under medical supervision. The problem is these books that he puts out and these things that he puts out aren't for that, it's for general population. And we've got women who are already got a really, really messed up relationship with food for years of diet culture, who are struggling with menopause, perimenopause symptoms of potentially weight gain. And they're desperate for something to do, and they're you know, to go on a starvation diet is absolutely the worst possible thing we could do, because it crashes our hormones at a time when we're already in this kind of hormonal nightmare half the time. But it's also really counterproductive to our relationship with food, but it's also really counterproductive to our actual general health. So if you go on a starvation diet, your body will break down your muscle for fuel instead, because you haven't got enough calories coming in. And that's bad enough at any time in life, but at a time when we will struggle to regain that muscle, even if we are resistance training, and at a time when we already are more hormonally vulnerable to everything going out of kilter if we're over restrict, it means we're even more likely to rebound by having these horrific binge like cravings that lead to binges, which then again feed into this psychological issue that a lot of people have, where they feel like they haven't got control over what they're eating. And so this is one of my really big issues, is this over restriction that is basically, it's made to sound like it's health. And because he's got the doctor in front of him, when most doctors have almost no nutritional education, that people think that he is someone that they should listen to if they're desperate. And so you've got people who think, well, the Dr. Michael Mosley says I should go days barely eating anything. And that's really, really detrimental for most people, I believe.
Can we talk about metabolic downregulation when we cut our calories too much? If you're happy to just go ahead, I would also like to just say that you are a nutritionist. You are a personal trainer. You've got loads of experience in this area. So you're not just spouting your opinion. Although I think an awful lot of nutrition is about opinion, and that's absolutely fine. We're all going to have our own opinion on this. But I think having an opinion that you can back up with the fact that you've done the research, and I know a lot of what you teach is grounded in evidence-based research. Let's talk about what happens from a metabolic downregulation point of view when we cut our calories too much for too long, when we are not in that grossly obese, clinically monitored state.
So one of the things that is a bit confusing for people is we hear these terms that are kind of thrown out on social media about metabolic damage, my metabolism's broken, etc. And then other people will come back and say your metabolism isn't broken, metabolic damage isn't a thing. And what you quite correctly said was metabolic downregulation, and that absolutely is a thing. So what happens is if you have, and it's very unfair, because if you've never dieted in your life, and obviously all online calculators are an estimate based on an average of population, but if you've never dieted in your life and you went online and you tried to work out what your average calorie needs were, and let's just say for argument's sake it was spot on. If you're someone who has dieted before in your life and you go on and you find that same number, well, the research shows that actually that number isn't going to be accurate, because over time your metabolism has become more protective and more adaptive. So it's used to doing less with more and being more efficient, therefore. And the unfortunate thing is that a 13-stone person who has never dieted in their life will run on more calories than a 13-stone person who has a history of dieting. Now, on top of that, we've also got the fact that as women, we are physiologically designed to have a more protective metabolism than men, because we're meant to have a higher body fat content. We're meant to keep the species alive. So if there's one man and 20 women, then more species is going to stay alive than the other way around.
Yeah.
I don't need to explain why. The issue with the metabolic adaptation is that what it means is your body is more used to doing less. More used to doing more efficiently with less. And it's going to remember that, for example. So once you've done it once, twice, etc., it's going to downregulate, but it will stay downregulated. And it's really, really difficult to get your metabolism up to a point. It is possible within, say, bodybuilders have done some experiments with reverse dieting, etc., to rebuild very carefully your metabolism so you can eat more and not gain fat. But it's in the general population, that's not generally how we do things. And so unfortunately, if you are someone who has cut out a lot of calories and your body is used to running your whole day on hardly any calories, then it's going to be very good at that. And an example I'll give of that, that is, I had a lady who she was mid-40s. She was highly active in her daytime because she ran a cafe. So her step count was between 10 and 20,000 steps a day. She was also a semi-pro cyclist. She cycled 120 miles a week, and that was within training, not just pootling around. Yeah. So some of it was what they call bonks, where you go until collapse, really hard. And she also did 2 resistance training sessions a week. But she couldn't lose fat. She had more body fat than she wanted to have. She felt rubbish about it and her energy levels were low. Now, if she went onto an online calculator, it would have said she needed thousands and thousands and thousands of calories. However, we actually knew she's in a very unusual position where you can actually tell what someone's metabolic rate is if you wire them up in a lab with an oxygen mask and all sorts of things. She'd actually done that test, so we even knew that about her when she came to me. And what she was eating every day was even below that. So we knew not just how much she was using in her training, but how much her body needed from what the lab said. And she was even eating less than that while doing all that exercise. And she still couldn't lose fat because for so many years, she'd so highly restricted her calories. Now, if I was to just go, right, eat several thousand calories more because that's what your body needs, she would have actually got fat, because you can't just take a body that is so used to doing so much with so little. However, I did manage to get her to eat a little bit more. And within 4 weeks, on more calories, she actually lost fat because her stress levels were reduced and her body started running not quite so much on empty. That's an example that's quite specific. But if you extrapolate that out to general people, if you took someone who didn't know anything about nutrition and didn't know anything about sports science and sports nutrition and said, this lady does this much exercise a week and this is her best metabolic rate, etc., this is what she's eating, they'd say you were a liar, or they'd say she was impossible.
She was underreporting, misreporting.
Exactly. And to an extent, we all do underreport. Like, they've done research on this as well. Even nutritionists are normally out by several hundred calories. So, you know, and of course, most of the food in the shop, if you buy something highly processed, can legally be out by about 20% as well.
Yeah.
But the thing is that if we're used to running on empty, basically, then we've taught our body to do that. The more we do that is going to be counterproductive, because you can't keep taking and taking and taking and taking and taking. And this is where the problem comes in with these starvation diets, etc., is that we've already down-regulated your metabolism. It's not that your metabolism's broken, but I understand why people feel like it is. It's why sometimes you'll get people go, oh, no, you just need to eat more and everything will be fine, which actually it's much more nuanced than that as well.
Yeah.
Because it's not exactly true to say, oh, you're fat because you're eating too little. But if someone is already used to existing on far too few calories, putting them on even fewer calories, their body's already used to doing so much on so little. All it's going to do is crash hormones, probably lead to binge urges, and really downregulate our general health. Our bones will be brittle, our skin will feel rubbish. Well, all our perimenopausal symptoms will be a bajillion times worse, because if we've got fatigue anyway and we're starving, the whole aim is to be at the weight we want to be, or losing fat in a sustainable way with our calories as high as possible, so that we can have health and vibrance and vitality, rather than this take everything out and down-regulate our metabolisms. So that's why people think their metabolisms are broken, and it's that they're down-regulated, and it's hard to regulate it back up, but it is possible.
Yeah, I mean, I always tend to use the kind of the simple numbers of, if your body is maintaining weight on 2,000 calories a day, and this is oversimplified, but it gives a bit of an understanding, your metabolic rate, we're talking about metabolism here, we say metabolism, that's quite different in reality to metabolic rate. What we're actually talking about is metabolic rate, the rate at which your body uses energy to manage the functions of the body, its general movement, any additional movement and exercise and energy that it expends. And if you're maintaining weight on 2,000 calories a day, just for argument's sake, and your basal metabolic rate, the amount that you need to survive on before you get out of bed, before you move, before you actually add any extra additional energy requirements into the day, say that's 1,400. So you need 1,400 of those 2,000 calories just to keep your respiratory system working, your circulatory system, your brain, and all of those other functions. So then, and what's MyFitnessPal does my head in because it defaults to 1,200 calories. So there's this old, oh, you need to be on 1,000 calories, or Michael Mosley's 800 calories, or MyFitnessPal's 1,200. So you go on a diet of 1,200 calories because that's what MyFitnessPal tells you you need to do. So generally what happens, I think, most of us think, eat less, move more. So I'm going to eat less and I'm going to start exercising and I'm going to create a deficit, which we do need to create a deficit if we want to lose weight. But so you go down to 1,200 calories. So you're already 200 calories below your body's minimum needs. And the body will hibernate. It will start to slow down. It will start to move less. It will slow the metabolic functions down because it hasn't got enough calories, enough energy. Let's not forget that a calorie is just a unit of energy. It hasn't got enough energy to function. And the body is incredibly adept at adapting. Adept at adapting. It's very good at adapting. So it will slow the metabolic rate down to below its needs to survive.
One of the things it will do whilst it's doing that and becoming more efficient at doing the things it can't switch off, it will also stop doing things that it considers to be non-essential, which long-term are essential,
Libido,
but in the short
sex.
term.
Yeah.
Like, and you know, like the renewal of bones and tissue will slow down because that's quite metabolically demanding. Our libido will slow down. Everything that isn't an immediate, you know, repair of hair or all of these things will also slow down with that down regulation because it's focusing on doing all it
anything
has
that's
to
not
do.
life essential. Yeah. And of course, so what happens is our body might lose weight. We'll lose some weight, might not all be body fat, but we will start to lose some weight. The scales will show something going off for a few weeks, maybe even a few months, and then it will stop and it'll plateau because it will have leveled out. Our incoming energy and our outgoing energy will have leveled off. So now you're on 1,200 calories and you're not losing weight. So the logical thing would be, I need to cut my calories further. So you cut your calories down to 1,000 and maybe you get a little bit of a restart to your weight loss, but your body is then having to slow down even more. Your metabolic rate is having to slow down even more because now you're giving it even less to work with. And of course, the problem there is when you get fed up and you think, actually, I can't sustain this anymore. I'm going to go up to, I'm still going to stay in a deficit though. I'm going to go up to 1,600 calories. If I was on 2,000, I'm going to go on to 1,600 now. But of course, your body's now trying to manage and it's down regulated to cope on 800 or 1,000. So you're now eating 600 or 800 calories more than your body can manage. So of course your weight is going to go back on, which for me, I believe that's why we see so many people come off a diet and put on more weight than they lost in the first place.
Well,
and you get this cycle, and of course, like exactly as you say, when we repeat that cycle, the body gets very efficient at saying, I'm recognizing a pattern here, I'm going to preserve.
The thing is, while all that's been going on, not only is the body going, I've got that now, I'm going to store it for next time that happens, we're becoming a fatter person as well, because while we've been in that deficit, although we may have fat on our body still, it's really hard to access fat stores. It's not so hard to break down muscle for fuel. So whilst our body is trying to do its best to keep everything going, it thinks, well, I've got these muscles and I better use that instead. So it's actually breaking down the precious muscle that we need to carry on doing its job. So then as a percentage, we've got less muscle compared to the percentage of fat. So you'll always, when you lose fat, lose a bit of muscle. There's ways around making it less. But exactly what you've said, then when it comes back on as fat. It doesn't come back on as muscle. So we become a fatter person every single time it happens.
So what we're hearing, what we're saying, is a bit of bloody cutting out a bit of pineapple and a bit of papaya or a bit of mango is not going to make that big a difference. So yeah, I'm totally in agreement with you. I read the article and there were some good things in there. I think, you know, a Mediterranean style diet is a good way to start. But there was a distinct lack of focus on cutting out the crap. And I was reading something today that had an acronym for crap, and I can't remember what it was. Crap food. And I can't remember what the acronym was. So let's talk about the article in the Daily Mail by another doctor, another guru, whose name escapes me.
She actually makes some sense. That's this
She
one.
did, yeah. Well, I don't suppose she calls herself a guru. I don't think any of them probably do. It's a media thing, isn't it? What was it about her article that you were more in favour of? What did she say that you felt, actually, this is so much more realistic?
Well, firstly, I didn't know who the lady was. I looked her up, and I think she actually does have some nutrition qualification as well, which is helpful. But what I really liked is that she was actually saying stuff that was A, relevant to perimenopause and menopause, but B, relevant just in life and for optimal health, which I think a lot of this diet stuff forgets about health anyway. Whereas this was actually, firstly, it linked to research. So it actually stated particular research that had been done at reputable universities. And it actually gave data, therefore, that was saying, for example, women who'd had a certain number of more portions of oily fish per week, that they had an average age of menopause that was significantly different, several years different
Later,
for example. So that's actual data found from research, and it was based on real whole foods. Then it started talking about gut health and explained quite well why it's important for us to have gut health. And it touched again on something that's not so touched on about estrogen metabolites and how we actually need to get this old estrogen and these estrogen metabolites out of our body, because these can be an issue. And this is why gut health is important. This is why fiber is important, etc. So again, it wasn't talking about just grabbing things and saying, don't do this, it's evil. It was explaining the rationale behind what it was saying and why, which I always like, because I think you should empower people with knowledge. It also referred to limiting processed foods, which again, something in favor of. And it then explained that our microbes in our gut can also be affected by estrogen, which I think quite a lot of people weren't aware of. They may be aware in that they suddenly develop intolerances or bloating, etc., but it actually explained that there is an actual reason for it, and then supported by mentioning certain ways that you can actually support your gut microbes as well. It also then talked about a study relating to hot flushes and fruit and vegetables. So again, it was something that was talking about something that's very healthful and beneficial for all of us, but it was actually referring to a study how fruit and vegetables can support our symptoms being less. It didn't say fruit and vegetables except for pineapple, because pineapple's got too much sugar. And then it did actually reference blood sugar, insulin, good blood sugar management, avoiding inflammation, etc. But again, it didn't get into like a kind of a guruism way of explaining it. It just explained it well. It mentioned loss of muscle mass again, which I thought was really important. So I felt like it covered a lot of things, and everything it said in it made sense and fitted with what I know from the research. It also mentioned the importance of sleep, and it also mentioned that in relation to appetite. So all of it I felt was highly relevant for midlife women, also relevant for anyone at any time of our life. And at no point did it go into any tokenistic, this is the boogeyman of this, or this is the magic pill for this.
And I think
Can you
that's
hear
the
my
thing,
neighbour's
isn't
dog?
it? I can hear them. I think that's the thing, isn't it? You know, this is not that complicated. It doesn't need to be as complicated as I think we make it. I definitely know that my body now is suffering from years of yo-yo dieting, and I have that metabolic down regulation, and I struggle now to lose weight. And all of the guru tips, do you know what? If I cut out pineapple, I would not lose weight. It just wouldn't work like that. It was Dr. Megan Rossi in that article in the Daily Mail. There was one thing that I did find a little bit confusing, or rather, I think the way it was worded could be confusing. She talked about cutting out fat, and then talked about the importance of omega-3 and oily fish and eating dark chocolate and you know, avocados and and nuts and seeds. And I thought, well, actually, that is quite confusing because they are all high fat foods. I think what probably should have been said was processed, artificial, ultra processed fats, because
Fats,
actually,
highly saturated.
yeah, she does go on later to talk about healthy fats. It could have been something in the editing that wasn't very good. So we've got two articles in the same week that are really quite different. And I loved, you know, if anybody is interested, go and check out Niki's LinkedIn, because she doesn't pull her punches at all. And I think quite rightly, I think it is confusing. What about diet clubs? What are your thoughts on the messages from diet clubs? So, you know, the argument could be they're great. They get community. You've got that social support. What are your thoughts on the likes of Slimming World, Weight Watchers, you know, those sort of groups?
So a lot of people who come and work with me have tried those sorts of approaches in the past. And the story I hear time and time and time again is that it gave them food issues, that it caused more problems. And I had a lady on the phone with me this afternoon, and like her and I both don't know whether to laugh or cry, because I get people to fill in like a bit of a potted history before they speak to me. And in that, it actually said, you know, I'm completely lost. I'm heavier than I've ever been, and I don't know what to do. And I'm considering going back to Slimming World. When she got on the phone and I said, all right, expand on, you know, your journey so far, said, for 10 years, I've just got a worse and worse, more and more messed up relationship with food. If I knew now what I knew then, I never would have joined Slimming World, because I was just over 10 stone when I joined Slimming World, and I thought I was fat, and now I realize I wasn't. And during the years I was with them, I managed to lose a couple of pounds, but then the entire rest of the time I was gaining weight. I even became a Slimming World consultant. When I left Slimming World, I weighed 13 stone. And I had a terrible, broken relationship with food. I still don't understand what I should and I shouldn't be eating. And I feel absolutely terrible about myself. And I was like, but you just said in your thing that you filled out, you were considering going back to Slimming World. And I was like, wow, they've done a pretty good job there. So you join them, you gain weight, you become a consultant to keep promoting them while your mental health is going downwards and you're continuing to gain weight. And now you're completely broken and you're thinking, I might go back again.
The solution is to go back. Yeah.
And what I feel really strongly is a number of things about the way that slimming clubs are very focused on weight. And this is, I mean, I weigh my clients on a 4-weekly cycle so that they're in line with their cycle. But you know, does that mean that if you were a bit constipated and you went one day, that you're going to feel like you failed because you haven't lost more weight? Well, actually, all you needed was a poo. So if you go back the next day, are you suddenly a success? But also, what I feel really strongly with a lot of these approaches, they're not teaching people. And there's rules, most of them contradictory, like the banana's okay, and then if you mash it, it's not okay. Well, strangely enough, I think that if you put it in your mouth and chew it, that's mashing it. But it's not teaching people, so it's not empowering people with knowledge so that they can go forward on their own. And I feel like our role in supporting people should be to enable them to thrive, to enable them to be empowered with knowledge, to deal with their shit, and to be able to feel better about themselves and about how they interact with food, with life, etc. at the end of it. And unfortunately, the story I keep getting time and time and time again from anyone who's been in any kind of commercial diet is the exact opposite of that.
Yeah, and I'd say that. And actually, I've probably been victim of this as well. Victim, is that the right word? Guilty, maybe?
Affected by it.
Yeah, affected. And I think, you know, I think there is too much emphasis on the scale number. But what I found was what are we celebrating here? And you know, you're absolutely right. Are we celebrating the fact that you just had a big poo before you came out to your Slimming World weigh-in? Because actually, and what I also worried about was that we celebrated the people who'd lost the most weight in a week. So what are we celebrating? The fact that they're probably dehydrated, the fact that they may well have, you know, starved themselves for that week, and it's not sustainable. I have a saying. Well, it's not my saying. I kind of got this when I did my nutrition training through Precision Nutrition, which is methods are many, principles are few. Methods may vary, principles never do. And I think Slimming World, Weight Watchers, the Joe Wicks diet, you know, all of these different methods are methods designed to meet one objective, and the one objective is to lose weight. And I don't even know that losing weight is what we should be focusing on. I think what we should be focusing on is improving our nutritional health, improving our gut health. And if weight loss happens as a byproduct of that, that's great if you're overweight. It's not great if you're not overweight. Actually, why would you want to be underweight? That's a whole societal thing we've got to talk about. So I think we need to think really carefully about, what do we want in here? Do we want methods, or do we actually want to eat by some tried and tested principles that will improve our health? What do you think? What are your thoughts?
100%. So I did 2 nutrition qualifications, and one of them was precision nutrition, and the other one was a more kind of sciencey one, because I felt they really complemented each other very well, because the sciencey based one hasn't got the kind of the coachy practicality that precision nutrition has for real world stuff. And I think that real world stuff, exactly that about the principles, is exactly what can help people get lasting change. Because you can come at it with some science and give someone a meal plan, but if you haven't explained actual
the behaviors aren't changing, then are they?
Doing anything. And this is the difficulty, is that all of these diet type approaches that are just telling someone what to do, it's really difficult to interact in the real world in that way. Firstly, because you don't understand, you're not empowered by the knowledge, but also because life isn't a set of rules. One day you might be at your friend's house, the next day you might be at a restaurant, the next day you're cooking for yourself at home, the next day you need to grab something from the supermarket. So you need to know what the best optimal choices are in all those scenarios. And correctly, as you say, that's, you know, about things like it's not a binary thing just about weight. It's about health, it's about longevity, it's about enjoyment and the social factors as well. And the thing is, it's really difficult because actually what we do want to lose, if we do want to lose anything, it's not weight, it's excess fat. But it's, you know, commonly we say lose weight. What we really mean is lose excess fat, which is quite complicated in today's environment, especially. But what's really difficult is losing excess fat doesn't always correlate with what we see on the scales anyway. For
No.
the toilet example I've just said, but also so many other examples, whether you've had a salty meal, you might weigh in heavier. It's why anyone who works, anyone who's reputable who works with any form of fat loss encourages people to look at not just the scales, but photos, measurements, but also all the non-scale measures of progress as well. Because if all you're measuring is losing weight, well, what if you didn't lose weight for a week? But what if in that week instead you got stronger, or you had higher energy, or you had a better relationship with food? Well, surely all those are wins. And if all we want to do is lose weight, we can lose sight of all those positive health aspects. And I think I know it affects men as well, but for us as women, we seem to have this thing that we've got to be as small and as tiny as possible and just be this disappearing woman. And actually, that's not a particularly psychologically healthy view of us for ourselves either.
And I think the thing that's often missed as well, especially during the menopause transition, is once we lose the production of estrogen from the ovaries, actually our body relies a bit more on the production of estrogen from fat cells. Now, I know there's arguments about whether it's the best type of estrogen or not, but you know, I think we are designed to carry a little bit of extra body fat as we get older. So almost kind of getting that into the headspace that it's okay to be a bit less lean as you get older is challenging. So okay, so we've looked at Dr. Mosley's nonsense. We've looked at Dr. Rossi's what appears to be more evidence-based, sensible suggestions. We've talked briefly about, you know, the slimming worlds and the diet classes, which I have to say I find it really, really challenging. I remember once being at Slimming World, and I was massively into exercise. I exercised so much, and I was actually told to stop exercising because when you exercise, it'll make you heavier. And they actually told me to stop exercising, which I thought was bizarre.
Teach their consultants that apparently, that you're not the first person who's told me that, and I was told that they're actually, and I don't know if it's still the case, that people were actually told to tell people that.
Yeah, bizarre. I also find it very difficult to get through my head that an avocado carries so many sin points, and far more than a Snickers bar, for example. It just seems back to front that you're promoting highly processed foods. Anyway, getting away from that, what would your top 5, putting you on the spot now, top 5 bits of advice be to get us out of this diet mentality and into the nutritionally healthier mentality? Sorry, this wasn't, I didn't forewarn you on this, so putting you on the spot here.
I think one of the things is to think in terms of macros. Now, I know that might seem like it's still like a diety type approach if people have only ever heard of macros in a diet context.
Can you explain what macros are for anybody who doesn't
know?
So
macros are protein, carbohydrate, and fats. So if you're thinking of a meal, the way I would approach it. Now, it's a little bit complicated if you were looking in terms of size, because fat is 9 calories per gram, whereas protein and carbs are around about 4 calories per gram. So you couldn't put an equal amount in thirds on your plate, because then you'd end up with way more fat. But what we want to be thinking, what I would say is, if you think of any meal you're having or any plate you're making, and you think, I want to have a portion of protein, I want to have a portion of carbs, I want to have a small amount of healthy fats, and I want to have lots of fruit and veg. Obviously, you'll know the precision nutrition hand portions approach, which I really like for people, and I use that with clients. But if people start thinking of their meals in terms of proteins, carbs, fats, and fiber, then you immediately take it away. And it's not to say calories don't count, because they do, but you are immediately taking it away from some of the way that diets focus on things. And you're actually thinking in terms of the nutritional quality of foods, because you can't help but think of nutritional quality by default, because you're thinking in terms of the macronutrients. So that would be one thing, because I just think it refocuses us onto something that's more helpful. I think the other thing, not to bang too much on about protein, is that most women, especially, we don't eat enough protein compared to the amount, for example, of carbohydrates and fats that we eat. And we do need to have protein to rebuild muscles, to support our tissues, to support our hormone signaling, etc., etc. So one of the really difficult things as well is that if we don't have enough protein, then it can mean that we feel like we're still hungry even when we're not. There's a theory called the protein leverage hypothesis, which I personally buy into, which is that if you haven't had enough protein, if you're severely deficient in protein, compared to even if you've had far too many calories, your body will still drive you to eat, because it's looking for that nutrient. I think it's also true of if you're having highly processed foods and your body's still looking for nutrients that it could have got from fruit and veg as well. So some of the overeating is driven by us not having enough nutrition quality. Especially, for example, snacks, if you can make them more protein based, then it's a win. Firstly, because you're upping your protein, which is going to support your body. But secondly, because it's probably going to keep you fuller. So if you had something that had more protein in as a snack, you're less likely to be hungry a short while later. And this is one of our issues. And so that can be my third thing. Think in terms of meals, and meals rather than snacking. Firstly, because it's great for our gut, because it means our gut can have a bit of a rest. But secondly, something that we as women are particularly guilty of, it is particularly when we're thinking we've got to manage our weight, is we think we'll have these teeny tiny meals and then we're hungry. And so then we think we need a snack. And by the time we know it, before we know it, we've had more calories in snacks than we've had in meals. And generally speaking, the meals are more healthful food, whereas the snacks are less healthful food. When I worked in HR, I used to live out of my snack drawer granola bars constantly to keep going, because I felt like I didn't have time to have a proper meal if I hadn't have brought one with me to eat. That's another thing. Hydration, really, really important. A lot of times we have really low energy because we're dehydrated. It can massively impact our performance, our energy levels, our cravings, etc. But also it can be mistaken for hunger. So often it can be that we think it's one when it's actually the other. I did have another one and I've completely forgotten what it was going to be. So maybe I should summarize it as
it was a bit
maybe I should summarize it as don't buy fast 800 or whatever.
The thing with hydration as well is, especially in menopause, we know that a small deficiency in hydration, even just a tiny percentage depletion in hydration, leads to brain fog and a lack of cognitive function. And of course, if you're already struggling with brain fog and cognitive disruption already, then drinking, with your precision nutrition bottle. I was so proud to get mine. Rebecca Butterham in Facebook has just said, it's like you're describing my actual life. And actually, I think it's like describing, I would say, probably the majority of women in the Western world's life, for various reasons. And most of us probably started the diet train quite young, when we didn't really need to be dieting at all. But there's so much pressure put on us. So just to recap, it was about balancing your macros at each meal. It was about protein, including a bit more protein in the diet. Not so easy if you're vegetarian or vegan. It does become a little bit more
Possible, but
complicated.
harder.
Yeah, it's possible, but I think sometimes people just cut out meat and don't realize that actually they're losing a huge amount of complete proteins. They need to work a little bit harder with their food combining to make sure they get that. Hydration. What was your fourth one?
I don't know.
See, that's because I put you on the spot and I didn't
Attention.
write them down. Didn't write them down.
Meals.
Oh, yeah.
Actual
Try and
meals.
reduce the amount of snacking between, and I definitely work better when I have breakfast, lunch, and an evening meal. I'm not great at breakfast, I have to say. I really struggle to eat breakfast. And there's certainly some people will definitely thrive on a sort of an eating window, a bit sort of intermittent fasting style window. But I think for the vast majority of menopausal women, intermittent fasting possibly isn't the best way to go. We are all different, so there's no one size fits all here. But in general, I think short term, maybe it's great, but longer term, it's actually quite difficult. And I certainly know that my blood sugar levels do get affected if I eat late, and I quite often don't eat until after lunchtime. And then I do tend to find that I overeat in the evening, without a doubt.
100%. And I thought of a fifth thing, which was food, the concept of food volume. So think of high volume foods. So when you're building your meals and when you're thinking of things, you want things that take up more space for fewer calories, which is naturally going to mean more fruits and vegetables, etc., rather than nutrient dense things that are very small, like a teeny cupcake that's like 400 calories or something. Which completely just, that's going to help us with our hunger, etc., as well. But I completely agree with you about what you've just said, about the kind of the timing of food and the intermittent fasting, but also I've really noticed that it's changed a lot in the last kind of 5 to 10 years in terms of how the eating times and the windows have changed for me. And I very much now feel like shifting more of my calories to a bit earlier in the day has definitely helped. And otherwise I do that rebound nighttime eating thing. And you don't win any awards for starving yourself in the day and then diving into the snack cupboard at night. All you do is make yourself feel rubbish about yourself.
Yeah, I do think there's a huge amount of listen to yourself, not the gurus. Listen to your body and listen to what your body needs. We haven't touched on emotional eating. I think there's a whole load of stuff there that goes beyond just eating healthily. I think, or healthfully. I think there's certainly emotional factors that trigger us to want to eat foods that are less healthy than probably we would make as a rational, logical choice. And we could have a whole conversation just on emotional eating or emotion-driven negative eating, because I actually don't like the term emotional eating, because I think eating is an emotional process. I think eating with a family feels great, and eating with friends, going out for dinner, of course there's an emotional element to that, and I wouldn't want to take the emotion away from food. Food is eating good food, and eating good food with people that you love and you enjoy. Having that is, to me, really important. It's an important part of being human. But brilliant. Any last again, we've gone on for nearly 55 minutes now, Niki. I love chatting with you. Any last thoughts?
I think the one thing that I've said this to so many people over the years is that one of the saddest things as women, as people, is when our relationship with food and with nutrition is so broken that because of, for whatever reason, overeating in private, biscuits, crisps, chocolate, whatever, means people then feel so bad about themselves and about their bodies that then they feel uncomfortable about going for a meal, for example, to celebrate something. And that's absolutely heartbreaking, because the reason that most people are overweight isn't because they went to their best friend's 50th birthday party. It's because they've sat on the sofa eating highly processed food-like items with no one around or with a few other people around repeatedly over time. And when we're on our deathbeds, we're going to remember the times that we had that were those times with our friends celebrating. We're not going to be glad that we sat on the sofa with a bar of dairy milk. We're going to be glad that we went to the celebrations. And what I feel is really sad is that at the moment there's so many people whose relationship with food is so messed up that they're losing that. And that's where we want to get back to. We want to get back to health, but we also want to be back to a point where our relationship with eating is about health and enjoyment and nice stuff. Because at the moment, for people with issues with food, eating isn't fun. It's like being in a destructive relationship. It's stressful and it's horrible. So it's about what can we do each day, step by step, to break that diet culture and diet mindset and break that destructive pattern and focus more on food again rather than eating, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it absolutely makes sense. And I don't know how we fix this. I think we've got a food industry that is hell-bent on keeping us fat, if I'm honest. There's no, absolutely, there's no incentive for food companies to make healthy food, because we know that the way it's a very scientifically driven industry. They create foods that are highly palatable, have a great mouthfeel, that we crave. The body is naturally drawn towards things that taste good and make you feel good. And with the best will in the world, if I had the choice, if both were healthy, galaxy, bar a galaxy or a load of broccoli, I know which one I'd rather have. And it's not the broccoli, but that we've got an industry that is driving us to more and more and more want this. And I think if we went back 100 years, we wouldn't have seen the same level of poor relationship with food, because food wasn't the, what's the word I'm looking for here? This is my menopausal brain losing track of the words I want to use. It was food was utilitarian. It was a means to survive. And I'm not suggesting that 100 years ago you didn't go to, and enjoy a meal. I'm sure that people did, but ultimately it was utilitarian. It was a need. And now it feels like it's, we have an abundance of food. I had an awful statistic earlier today. I was listening to something saying that in the United States, the average lifespan for an adult is lower now than it was 20 years ago. We're actually going backwards. And a lot of that is to do with diet and obesity and that sort of poor relationship with food. And isn't that sad when we've got so many great things in life allowing us to live longer and enjoy life longer? We're letting food shorten our lives. It's just,
but this is the thing, it's not actually food, it's food-like substances that we are eating as food, and this is the problem. And so that's the thing, if we can even just take a percentage of our diet back from being highly processed foods to more natural foods, we're taking a step back for health, but we're also taking a step back that probably will lessen our drive to overeat. Because these foods are designed to make us overeat, for the fact that if you were going to want to make loads of money, you make something that people want to eat more and more and more of. You don't make something that makes people satisfied. And we know from research that what it does to the gut microbiome is terrible. But even on a more immediate basis, if you in closed studies in metabolic wards, which is where you can't get out and you get what you're given, basically, that if people are allowed to eat as much as they want, they will overeat by hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of calories more a day if the food is highly processed, compared to if the food is more nearer to its natural source.
Yeah.
Now, some of that's because it just doesn't fill us up and it's so nutrient dense because of the way they've made the molecules, but it's also because it does affect our ghrelin, and it does make us hungrier sooner afterwards. So we can actually do something so practical for ourselves by even just changing the proportion of our diet that is real food.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be massive, does it? If, you know, there's this whole sort of 1% improvement. If you could make a 1% improvement to your diet every day over 365 days, that would be massive. And what are your thoughts? And I'm going to cut us down soon because we've been going over an hour. Very quick thoughts on your impressions around the 80-20 philosophy for planning out your daily food intake.
I like it, except for one thing. So it has one caveat. And I do think people should have some pleasure foods. What you have to be sure or careful of is that your 20 in size isn't like 120 in calories.
Yeah.
We just have to be aware of that. And so I teach my clients to be really intentional about your pleasure. And it is nice to have some pleasure food, but knowledge is power again on what the impact of that is. So if you have a small amount of something and it's highly calorific, to understand that a small amount of something uber calorific could be more calories than the entire rest of the day put together. So you think it's 80-20, but actually it's the other way around. So
I think you're absolutely right. It's not 20% of the volume, it's 20% of your calorie intake. So, you know, if you're on 2,000 calories, we're talking about 400. Is that my maths right?
I mean, I'd even say probably less would be helpful for people if they're trying to cut down. But yeah, it's not in food volume, because you'll get yourself in a pickle very quickly. It's on percentage of actual calories, definitely.
But for me, it's definitely about making those small incremental changes where, you know, think about your daily intake and think about taking one ultra processed or highly processed food out and replacing it with something more natural. It doesn't have to be that this sort of wholesale, I can't have this reductionist approach to dieting. It really is about making small incremental changes that the body will then start to habitually expect, as opposed to this sort of hard stop on everything that you enjoy, this feeling of deprivation, this feeling of guilt when you do have something that you're not meant to have. You know, there's so many factors that go into this, but ultimately, I think we'll finish with the fact that not eating pineapple isn't going to make a heap of the difference. If you like pineapple, go and have it. In fact, definitely go and have it and cut out something ultra processed instead. Niki, thank you very much. Another great conversation. And I think we've got another one planned. We haven't got a one planned for next week because I shall be on my way back from a cruise. So I don't know if you're wanting to do something in the Facebook group. For anybody watching this on YouTube, if you found this interesting, we have a Facebook group called Your Best Midlife. I'll put a link in the comments. It's basically we support women going through their midlife transition. We talk menopause, health, well-being, just basically feeling good about this next chapter. So if you fancy coming and joining us, do come and request to join. And yeah, we'll leave it there, I think, Niki. Thanks very much.
Lovely to speak to you again.
Same happened last week when we came to the end. Your volume went. Try that again.
Maybe it's me. Maybe I just go like, oh, we've
Really?
spoken. I
Brilliant.
actually think there were so many things we spoke about we could pick up and run with another week that it's just we could
Yeah,
talk
well,
about
if we're not together next week, maybe I don't know if you're planning on diving into the Facebook group. We'll do something the week after, I'm sure. Brilliant. All right, take care. Bye.